Thank you for joining this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar in partnership with the Media Development Investment Fund. Larger audiences, more engagement, and bigger impact, how journalists can better market investigative stories. I'm Emily Goligoski, and I lead the audience research practice at The Atlantic from New York, currently from my living room. I previously worked on the membership puzzle project team at New York University, where I got to learn from Styli and Daily Maverick, after working as a user experience researcher at the New York Times, where Yasmin's vision was instrumental to our audience growth efforts. And today I'm excited to share with you Rossalyn's work from BuzzFeed, GIJN, and beyond. One of the great frustrations of investigative journalism today can be teams spending weeks, months, or years on an important story and then failing to reach many people with it or see much recognizable impact as a result. This can be demoralizing, and it doesn't represent the immense work that went into this vital storytelling. Powerful, in-depth journalism has maximum power when it's thoughtfully planned and distributed to audiences of interest, as we'll discuss. Today, we will focus on practical ways to ensure basic strategies and tools are in place to maximize your team's engagement. We're going to think a great deal about how to develop your capacity in resource-considerate ways, including how to keep your team safe. We're going to be emphasizing practicality and efficiency. We know that there are teams and organizations of varying sizes participating in this webinar, and some of what's ahead today is media strategy and prioritization, metrics analysis, website tools and tips, social media essentials, and publishing partnerships and collaboration. We share all of this with the goal of building and engaging audiences. And you'll hear Yasmin start off by talking about recency, frequency, and volume, and some other excellent tips. What we won't be talking about today is fundraising tactics specifically. That is something that other GIJN resources go much further in depth in than we will today. What we're talking about is really meaningful changes in ways of working. And before I introduce you to today's panelists, I wanted to just give a little bit of research background, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here very briefly. Recently, Dr. Joy Jenkins, Catherine Quamby, and I studied investigative newsrooms around the world, sites like Direct 36, Kraut Reporter, Corrective, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. There were a few themes that came up in that work that are very relevant here, what we called memberful routines or audience contributions. And they can really happen at many different points in the long arc from investigation inception at one end and distribution and audience reaction on the other end. We have seen ways of working with audiences across all of these phases, from very early to actually co-reporting, fact-checking, and critically distributing your work and finding natural audiences for this. One way to read this, and there's more details in this report, you can involve your audience throughout your investigations, including very early and quite creatively. I will stop sharing now to let you know that we'll have time for some questions after we hear from our speakers, but we're also going to be extending our question time to tomorrow, and we're going to be running an open forum related to this session tomorrow at the exact same time. More details on how to sign up will follow at the end. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers, and I'm really thrilled that we've been joined by three senior experts who have extensive experience on engaging audiences with investigative stories, advising digital media organizations, and conducting social media. I'll introduce them in the order that they will speak. First, Yasmin Namini is a digital media consultant. She previously worked at the New York Times, where she was the architect of its global print and digital consumer business and led the strategic development and launch of the Times' digital subscription pay model. Second, Styli. Styli is the CEO and publisher of South Africa's Daily Maverick. He has helped establish and develop various media startups and projects, including Daily Maverick and The Gathering, South Africa's premium media and politics conference. Last but certainly not least, Rossalyn Warren is GIJN's Digital Outreach Director and an expert on social media. She was previously a senior news reporter for BuzzFeed News and has contributed to The Guardian, CNN, and the BBC. In 2017, Forbes named her among the 30 under 30 in European media. Lastly, before we start, a little bit of information about the Global Investigative Journalism Network for those of you who aren't familiar with GIJN. GIJN is the largest global network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations with 203 member organizations in 80 countries. But it works with journalists everywhere, in nonprofits, in commercial organizations, and with freelancers. It has an extensive range of resources and tip sheets, including one from Rossalyn out this morning, to help journalists worldwide. So please check them out at gijn.org. MDIF invests in independent media around the world, delivering news, information, and debate. They provide affordable debt and equity financing, supported by tailored technical assistance and advisory services to help independent media thrive and safeguard their editorial independence. We're very grateful for MDIF's support, and you can see Patricia Torresbird on the call. And we also want to hear from you in the audience. It's very apropos of our topic today. Please send written questions and messages in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Again, we're going to have more time to get to hear your questions tomorrow. You can start asking questions starting now, and in English, Russian, Spanish, French, or Arabic, and your questions will be translated. When the speakers are finished, GIJN colleague Hannah Coogans will join us on screen to moderate the questions. And with that, I would like to go ahead and invite Yasmin to share her screen. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, share screen. Okay, awesome. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you are in the world. It's really an absolute pleasure for me to be here to talk to you all about engagement and how to improve that within your organizations. For starters, I get asked the question all the time, engagement, engagement, engagement. Why does it matter? Why do we need to focus on engagement so much? And the obvious reason is that the more engaged people are, the more they will read your stories. But what you may not also realize, if you have a subscription business or a membership business, or if you're just trying to raise donations, the more highly engaged your readers are, that correlates very highly with more subscriptions, more memberships, higher donations. And oh, by the way, the more engaged your subscribers or members or donors are, the more content they consume, the more likely they are to stick around. So doing things like collecting email addresses, doing email marketing, and having a really smart newsletter strategy, which we're going to spend a few minutes talking about in my presentation. These are among the best tactics that you can use to increase engagement with your users. And the other important point that I want to make in the next few minutes is that no matter what your job is within your organization, you have a role in driving engagement. Engagement is really a part of everyone's job. But let's spend a minute talking about engagement metrics. Again, I often get asked the question, how do I measure engagement? How do I know if my users are engaging with my content? Well, there's a very simple framework to think about this. It's called recency, frequency, volume. And let me start by saying that if you can't measure all three of them, pick one that you can measure. And generally that's volume. But let's start with recency. Recency, very simply, is the number of days since a reader last visited your website, your app, whichever platform it is that you're publishing on. And obviously, someone who visited yesterday or 3 days ago is more engaged than someone who visited a month ago or 2 months ago. So the recency number, the days since your reader's last visit, the smaller that number is, the better. Secondly, with regard to frequency, that's defined as what's the number of visits that your user had over the past 30 days. And again, if someone visits you 5 times in 30 days versus only 1 time in 30 days, that's better, right? They're more engaged. So you want your number of visits, you want your frequency, you want that number to increase over time. And then the third part of this metric is volume. The simplest way to think about volume is how many page views has a reader consumed in the past 30 days. Again, those page views could be the home page, they could be articles, they could be videos, they could be podcasts. The idea here is the more page views a reader consumes, the more engaged they are. So again, if you can't measure all 3, find one of these metrics that you can measure and try to improve that metric over time. Now let's talk about a simple framework that I use all the time. It's what I refer to as the +1 engagement strategy. And this is where I like to get back to the point I made at the very beginning about your role within the organization. We all can improve engagement if we think about this +1 strategy. Whether you are a reporter, an editor, a product manager, maybe you're focused on user experience, maybe you're a designer designing the web pages, maybe you're an engineer writing the code, maybe you're focused on social media. Whatever your role is, every day think about what is it that I can do to encourage our visitors to do just one more thing, to click on one more page, to read one more story, to watch one more video, to listen to one more podcast. If you're an engineer, you may say, well, what can I do to do +1 strategy? Well, an obvious answer there is page load times. Okay, if your pages load really slowly, especially on mobile, on a smartphone, people jump. So even if you're an engineer, you have a role to play in improving engagement. If you're a designer, you may be thinking, what can I do to improve engagement? Again, the navigation, the way in which you do navigation on your website, user experience folks. So I truly believe that no matter what your role is within the organization, there is something that you can focus on that will improve engagement, and be thinking about it as, what can I do to encourage our readers to do one more thing? Read one more story, watch one more video, listen to one more podcast, click on one more page. So let's talk about some +1 engagement strategy best practices. The first best practice, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, is newsletters. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking in more detail about newsletters. But newsletters are a really important way to drive engagement. I've got an example here of a newsletter that I get every morning from CNN. And they're telling me first thing in the morning, these are the 5 things you need to know today. A very simple example of how to start a newsletter. Secondly, with news alerts, breaking news alerts. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. Well, as investigative journalism entities, publishers, you may not have breaking news every day, but you certainly have breaking news when you publish a new investigation. Let's make sure that we're pushing that out to folks. Make it really easy for your readers to save and share articles. Make it really easy for users to sign up to give you their email address and to sign up for newsletters. There's a little example here from the Washington Post. You can see a very simple designed creative that allows me to sign up for coronavirus updates. And just generally speaking, you want to make sure that your website, your app, it's designed in such a way that makes it really easy to find articles. In the top right-hand corner there, I've got an example from The Guardian, where pretty much anywhere, any page I go to on their website, I'm going to see this box that has the 10 most popular articles. It's engaging me to click on another article. Recommended stories. In article links, an example here from the New York Times. Just in this one paragraph, they have 2 links to other articles. Reader feedback, comments, letters to the editor, and even things like building community through virtual events. Here's an example from one of your colleagues, the Bureau Local, an event that they did on March the 14th. So there are lots of different ways in which we can think about how to drive engagement. As I mentioned, newsletters are one of the most important ways. And if you don't know this guy, Dan Oshinsky, you need to reach out to him and get to know him. I refer to him as an email and newsletter guru. He's got a great tool. If you go to notanewsletter.com, you can sign up for his, I believe it's roughly monthly newsletter. He calls it Not a Newsletter because it's actually a Google Doc, but every month he's got fantastic tips on how to improve your newsletters. But to sum it up in Dan's words, there are basically 5 rules for creating emails that your readers will love. The first one is my favorite. Rule number 1, content is king, but distribution is queen, and she wears the pants. Now, what that means, as we know, content is king. Without great content, we don't have anything to share. But we've got to get it distributed. We've got to get that content out there. And one of the ways in which we do that is through newsletters. And that's why newsletters are so valuable. Rule number 2, create habits and routines. Again, this is where newsletters really come in handy, because if you have people that have signed up for a daily newsletter, they're going to come back to you every day. You're building that habit of people coming back to you every day. If you don't have the capability to do a daily newsletter, create a weekly newsletter or a bi-weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter. Allow people to become habituated to not only receiving your newsletters, but clicking on them and using them as a way to engage with your content. Rule number 3, start with a building block. And I would add, make it simple. So think about what the context of your newsletter is. Is it a service that you're providing? Is there a utility that you're providing? Is it a newsletter from the editor? Is it a newsletter that has personality? So start with a building block and go from there. Rule number 4, and this is really important. Trust is hard to win and easy to lose. It's really important that when we get people to sign up for our newsletters, that we're not selling that list or using that list in some way that was not intended. And finally, rule number 5, direction is more important than speed. Get started, think about what this newsletter is that you're building is going to do, more important than just getting it out there quickly. And again, I encourage you to sign up for Dan's Not a Newsletter newsletter. Another fantastic resource that's out there, go to newsletterguide.org. This is a fantastic resource, whether you are just getting started with newsletters or you already have some newsletters, but you want to improve on it, go to this website. Lots of great resource here, including some open source newsletter templates that'll make it really easy for you to launch newsletters if you haven't already. And it's provided to you by the Shorenstein Center, Lenfest Institute, and Yellowbrim. Yellowbrim, they're a newsletter vendor. Finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is test and learn. Having a test and learn capability in your organization is really, really important. This is how we optimize for higher and better performance. This is how we continuously improve performance. And we do it through something called A/B testing. The way to start is to think about a question that you might have or a hypothesis that you might have around how to improve something. Think of it in this context. Because we observed A, changing B will cause C, and therefore we expect this D effect. So let me give you an example. Because we observed highly engaged visitors reading our corruption investigation, we believe that by adding links to our corruption investigation on other article pages will lead to increased page views. And if we do this, we expect that we might see 5% growth in page views. So when you have an idea or a thought about something that could improve engagement, put it in this format, put it in this context, think about it as a hypothesis. And from there, you can test to see if in fact you do get that improvement. And I always recommend that you start with very simple tests. You can test headlines to see what kind of headline drives more volume, drives more traffic. You can, with your newsletters and with your email, you can test subject lines. Believe it or not, the day of the week and the time of day that you deploy a newsletter makes a big difference. You can test those things. When it comes to recommended articles or videos or podcasts, you can test where on the page you should place them or what kinds of articles you should place them on. The same with your save and share links. Where on the page should I be placing those links so that more people click on them? And then, of course, the all too famous call to action buttons that we all have, right? Whether it's click here to sign up for a newsletter, click here to read the next article, click here to donate, click here to subscribe or become a member. The color of that button, the wording of that button, where you place that button on your page, all of those things make a difference, and you can optimize those things through A/B testing. And there are some really good free resources out there. Google Analytics, Google Optimize, there are free versions of this that can at least get you started. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity to chat with you all today. And also, this is my direct email address, yasmin.namini@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. I know we're going to have some Q&A today and also Q&A tomorrow. But if for some reason you have a question outside of today or tomorrow, please reach out to me. I'm happy to share my expertise with any one of you. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Yasmin. And Styli, we will turn to you next. Also, interpreters shared with me that I spoke a bit quickly. And so I'll ask other presenters to really take your time for everyone's understanding. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm speaking to you from Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm going to share with you an example of an investigative story that we did at Daily Maverick in 2019 that helped us really maximize the effort and the time that went into doing this story. So a little bit of background, in mid-2019, we were working on a potentially explosive investigation that came to us regarding the personal spending of the leader of South Africa's third largest political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters. Yes, the irony is not lost on us with that name. We received the information that the party leader had been on a 4 million rand or roughly $250,000 spending spree. And those events, those garments, those things that he bought were funded by payments that had been looted from a mutual bank that subsequently went bust in 2018. And to make matters worse, that mutual bank was set up to help bank communities that were using savings schemes and to allow financial services to be offered to those poor communities in South Africa. So a sort of double whammy in terms of the money that was lost there and ultimately looted and used on things like this. Payments included luxury accommodation, Gucci loafers, Armani suits, horse racing, hospitality events. And to put that all into perspective, the leader of the party receives a parliamentary salary of 1.3 million rand, or just $87,000. So you can see that the 4 million rand that was looted in this spending spree was a significantly higher amount than he received in his annual salary. We actually had traced 10 million rand had actually been had passed through shell companies and into the hands of the party leader. So while we were working on this, we had obviously a couple of objectives. The first one is to defend truth and accountability. So the story of the investigation was the primary objective, to shine a light on this fraud and corruption that was happening and was obviously of huge public interest as well. But we also had some other ancillary objectives around this investigation. The first one is to do a thoroughly good job and that we don't get sued with it. That we deliver it in a way that people will want to consume it and to reach as many people as possible, and to build trust and brand awareness with new audiences, and to make sure that this investigation is used in a way to bring in new audiences to Daily Maverick through various different channels. And then also to support the business goals that we have, which is to grow our membership program and to grow the number of newsletter subscribers that we have, which Yasmin has pointed out is an integral part of engagement, and for us, an integral part of growing our membership program. And another one that we wanted to do, and why we did things a little bit differently with the story, is we wanted to extend the shelf life of the story, given the amount of work that went into this, but also in terms of maximizing the effort and the time. And so we came up with a slightly different approach than we would normally do. So here are just some screenshots of some of the screen grab of the video and the designed images that we added to the story to help to add some extra flavor to it. A little bit more about the approach. It took months of verification work. We got the list of payments that were made, and then what we did, our investigative journalist did, went around linking social media posts by this party leader to the location and date of the shops that were listed in the information that we received. The investigative journalist, the editor-in-chief, and the videographer focused on building the story, which ended up being over 4,000 words, a 6-minute video, and included those designs as well as a video. The marketing planning kicked off with a few weeks to go, and that included a few things like sending the story as a Scorpio scoop. Scorpio is our investigative unit name, and sending it as a story to our newsletter base a few hours before we published it online. And so that helped really drum up extra buzz around the story. A lot of media and a lot of journalists from other publications and other media outlets are on that list. And so we were already able to create some kind of excitement around the story coming. It was a pretty big story, and then published it a few hours later. It also gave our newsletter base a bit of a treat to show that sometimes we do give them some extra benefits beyond just good content. They got the story before anyone else did. It remained the top story on our homepage for the entire day, and was the main story in our newsletters that ran throughout the day as well. We also took the opportunity to maximize PR around the story. The investigative journalist, Polly van Beek, was busy with radio interviews, TV interviews, as well as other media channels as well. Social posts were obviously done around the story, and as a great example of what of how you can do that on Twitter, ProPublica does really great with creating Twitter threads about their investigative pieces online that act as a way of bringing in new audiences and also sharing the story in a different channel. And then also putting together curated SEO headlines. So many of us will use WordPress and use plugins like Yoast to maximize the benefit that SEO can bring. You need to be looking at creating curated headlines for search specifically and for social media, because often the headline that's used on the story is too long and doesn't fit into the little widgets or the little space that is available in search previews, for example. So we used Google Earth Studio to overlay each of the locations. And so as we flew around to each of the locations around the country, we managed to add extra images and graphics to the story to help create a much richer video than just sort of moving around on a map. And that was our first experiment with using Google Earth Studio, and added a really rich addition to the story. Here we have some examples of the story appearing in our newsletters. You can see it running as the main story in our newsletters. And our cartoonist, Sapiro, is South Africa's best cartoonist and also world famous, also added extra content around the story. Here you can see the party leader who presents himself as a champion of the poor, Robin Hood of the poor, actually stealing from the poor this time around. And you can see the loot behind it in that cartoon. And then interestingly here as well, what we did was we published many other stories around this particular story. We had follow-up stories, we had editorials, we had analysis and opinions lined up. And what I've done here is I've highlighted the stories as they were consumed by the various different audience segments. So on the left is our most engaged segment, people who come to the site more than 15 times in a month. In the middle is between 2 and 14 times. And then on the right-hand side is those who came just once. And so you can see the main story, VBS, theft, money laundering and looting, was the #1 story across all 3 segments. And then you can see how all the other stories linked to this story that we did as follow-ups, or as the story unfolded and we did a part 2, you can see how they dominated the list of stories for each of those segments for the month, but particularly our most engaged audience. You can see almost all of them were related to this particular story. And some of the results that we had, we published 11 articles linked to the investigation in that month. The main story got 267,000 page views for us, with an average time on page of 8 minutes and 41 seconds. Desktop, which was 18% of the device category, had an 11-minute engaged time, while mobile had 75% of the page views with 7 minutes, and 50% of the readers were new visitors to Daily Maverick in that time. And then also as an add-on benefit that we mentioned to that, we used that story and the work that we did in that story in direct marketing to convert those newsletter subscribers into members, and we ended up having one of the best months for membership conversion in that time. So for us, the story around that and what we did differently was we took the time to plan how were we going to maximize the effort that we put into this. We had lined up additional editorial around this, the analysis, the opinion pieces. There were 2 or 3 investigative pieces that came out of this. And then we also took the time to make sure that the marketing around this was also going to support this article's shelf life, and that it was going to be read in multiple ways and dominate the news agenda and the news story in South Africa for more than just one day, which was what was happening in the past. And so with publishing these articles, with adding the multimedia, with adding the Google Earth video as well, these were all extra dimensions that we had done that we hadn't done before, and we could see the impact of that not only in the page views and the engaged time on site, but also in the conversion of new members for us that month. And that's it from me. I look forward to taking questions in our sessions in a bit.
Excellent. Thank you, Styli. There are some terrific questions in the Q&A. Just one very quickly, and then we'll turn it to Roz. There was a question about whether you considered sort of co-publishing a big story or investigation like this with another publication, sort of for the purposes of boosting the potential number of people who would see and act on it.
Yeah, so we didn't do it with this one, but we have done projects like that in the past where we have collaborated with others and where we regard the work to be so important that we just syndicate it to other publishers and offer it to them for free. But generally what happens is, because so many other media titles follow the investigative work that we do, generally the aggregated pieces that come out of that, are done by the other news sites, almost do a good enough job in terms of replicating it on other sites as well. So in fact, I think if you Google this story with that investigative journalist, I think our article only comes up third in search results. So yeah, it's both a curse and a blessing that our work is followed so closely. But yeah, it's very rare that any of our investigations aren't picked up and aggregated in some way on most of the other news sites.
Thank you. And seeing that time spent, that 8-minute number was really impressive. Thank you so much. And Roz, now to you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. I will talk you through, I'll go through a couple of slides, and let me share my screen for you 1 second. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through, before I begin, a lot of this information is now already on the GIJN website under an article that we published today, where I outline the 4 key areas that I think any news organization or any media company or anybody dealing with content should be thinking about in 2021, when there is a lot of noise and a lot of information online and you are fighting for that attention online. I've come at this from both the perspective of a journalist as well as within a news organization, where it's incredibly frustrating, where you produce something great, you spend months working on a big story, you have this exclusive story, and you publish it and it goes a bit flat. And it's not a reflection on the quality of your work, but it's an indication that there's just so much noise out there that the investment and the time you put into building out an audience and readership and really working hard about how you distribute things is equally as important as the reporting itself. So the first approach, that if I'm going to walk through my notes as if I were a media organization starting out. So you're a media company, or you're a reporter, and the first step is actually figuring out who your audience is, right? Because if you don't have any understanding of who you are trying to reach, where in the world they are, the demographic, the age group, where they live online, how they consume information, what sort of information do they consume the most? Do they prefer video? Do they prefer text? If you don't have any idea who your audience are, you're already shooting yourself in the foot before you even begin. You are stalling the efforts, because you cannot build readership if you don't have a clue who your audience are. So my first piece of advice, and I have more notes about this in my distribution sheet, but is to really think deep and hard and work with your team as an organization to figure out who you are trying to reach. To give you an example, is it low income readers, and do they have high quality internet access? Or is it younger readers? Is it, and they consume news and information on different platforms? So first things first, who is your audience? Secondly, once you have a clear idea about who your audience are, you need to establish what platforms you need to use. You do not need to be on every platform. You don't need a Facebook page if actually you find that your work and your audience, it doesn't really make sense to be on a Facebook page. There's low engagement there. Your audience aren't really on there. Actually, there are much more frequent users of Twitter. So maybe your efforts in-house as a media organization, you should scrap that page and you should shift your attention to other platforms. So my first piece of advice is to not necessarily be across all platforms just because they are there. And so the way that I'm presenting this first slide is I want anyone watching this webinar to start thinking about platforms as being, platforms will always change, but the content is always going to stay the same. And so you do not need to chase a shiny new toy. I've worked in newsrooms where suddenly Facebook Live was the thing everybody was using, or TikTok is this brand new thing, but actually You don't need to to pick up these platforms for the sake of it just because they're popular. So the way that I look at platforms are these three areas. There's one-way communication. So you're broadcasting to people. So this could be newsletters, this could be WhatsApp broadcast. And on these platforms, you're still giving your reader the options to give comments or feedback, and you're still talking to that audience in a way that feels personable, but those platforms do not offer an immediate or visible response. So again, looking at the capacity within your newsroom, does it make sense actually to invest all of your time in a one-way communication, like a strong newsletter? Or if you have a larger social media team or an audience team, you can then maybe expand to one-way conversations, but with comments. So this is a second group that I think about content platforms in. You're sharing your work on a platform with your audience, but the only feedback you're getting is in the comments. So think about Instagram posts in the comments underneath, or under YouTube comments. So you're still engaging with an audience and you're still seeing their response to your work, but you're not necessarily having that immediate one-way, two-way conversation. And then finally, the third way I think about platforms and the ways that you can distribute things is two-way conversations. You're posting online and you can expect immediate engagement. You need staff in your team to be able to respond quickly to, for example, tweets sent to you. Or if you are hosting an Instagram Live, you need a team that's ready and prepared to talk to you and have a team ready. So the broader points here being, don't chase platforms. And these platforms are always going to change, but your content and your work and how you distribute them will differ. So leads me to my next point. There are always going to be different ways to present your content. I imagine most people here sort of do investigations or bigger pieces of research. Again, to stress what I said before, just because you have a big piece of work doesn't mean you then have to throw it in a TikTok video, or you need to, you immediately post it on a post on Instagram. What I'm encouraging you to do is think creatively about how you distribute your work. And obviously we know the types of content being text and audio and image and video. I would look at each piece of work that you have. And the way that I think about it, if I were a media organization, is thinking about each piece of work and launching it as if it's like a book launch, really like putting the effort and the time behind each piece of work that you have, and thinking strategically and smartly about all the different ways that you can distribute that piece of work. And so, for example, thinking about these types of platforms, I just wanted to, this is actually just this morning, I threw this in to found some of these tweets because I see this all the time. I see the ways in which we present content. I just want to stress, just because, for example, Twitter is great at sharing a lot of links, doesn't mean you can't also use Twitter as a storytelling tool. Or, for example, just because Instagram is a visual platform doesn't mean that you can't use it for audio. It's actually really effective for audio clips. So just because these platforms present themselves in one way, there are different ways that you could be using them. So, for example, this Haiti thread on the right was this really viral thread that was a really effective way of using storytelling and essentially putting an entire piece of work in one really highly engaged thread. And that went really viral, and it was such a simple way to present a piece of information or some story or an investigation in a really visual, easy to digest way. However, it's still, if you are a news organization, you're thinking, oh, I've got this 3,000 word piece, what do I do with this? You can think about it, and can you actually present it in a thread on Twitter? Can you present it in a take highlights from that piece and share it in slides on Instagram? AJ Plus do a great job of this. They don't necessarily include links or video links into their tweets, because they know they understand the importance of actually building out their name and their name recognition and the trust behind AJ Plus on Twitter. And that doesn't always mean driving traffic to a website or to a YouTube channel. It means actually building visibility on that platform. So they actually sometimes will just do a simple tweet thread about the relevant information or whatever story it is that day. And I don't mean to pick on The Guardian, but this middle example, look at how the share text in The Guardian is the same as the headline. It's a waste of space. Like, they have all that space in the tweet where they can add context or add some further information, but they've just repeated the same thing and they've just put dash video. like, so people like it's just, they could just embed the video. You know, they've got an audience there on Twitter. They could just embed the video, and then they can add a tweet after to follow up with a link to more information about the story. So and also that thumbnail, you know, like, let's maybe A/B test some thumbnails here. Like, what are we, when there is so much noise and information online, and you are trying to catch the eyes of readers, headlines, thumbnail images, and the shared text of an article, they all matter. Like, it's not, you can't expect readers to just come to you anymore in 2021. You need to actively find ways to find those readers, and to understand that if they're scrolling through their Facebook feed and there are 100 pieces of content, you know, what headline doesn't cut off because of the character limit? Or how are you going to make sure that that visual thumbnail or that shared text is actually going to make them stop, pause, click on your article, and then actually engage with that? So all of these things matter. How, you know, we always joke that people just read the headlines. Sometimes that is the case. So the headlines need work and then if they're going to read the headlines, then they're going to click through, hopefully, and then build from there. Like, but the headlines are such a key, important part of how people consume information in the modern age. And just a note on metrics, and I have a lot more links and resources and things in my guide. Metrics don't really mean anything if you don't have any goals. So what does success actually look like for you as an organization? If you are small and starting out and you've got a team of 5 or 10 people, actually maybe having 5,000 subscribers in an email is really amazing, because those are 5,000 people that are going to keep coming back to you and remember your name and see your name in their email inbox. Or if you are a larger organization, do you actually just want to really focus? If you focus, you know, cover a subject that's really commonly discussed on Twitter, does it make sense for you to focus all your effort on Twitter and build it and aim for, say, 40, 50,000 followers on Twitter? What does success look like for your organization? And again, going back to that key point of where do your audience live online, and does it make sense to be on that platform? And then finally, just a last note, getting traffic is great. And I always hear this, is like, you know, our number one aim is to have loads of readers, but it's like traffic doesn't equate to engagement. It doesn't equate to impact. And there's so much more work that needs to be done when you're thinking about retaining those readers so they keep coming back. I'm happy to go more into more detail about all of that. That's a very summarized version of what I've put together on the GIJN website. But yes, I'm also happy to answer lots of questions.
Thank you very much. And I just want to underline or sort of underscore something that you said, which is you don't need to be in all places, that can actually dilute your effectiveness. And there are a few comments in the Q&A sort of as follow-up there. Thank you, all 3 of you. I think this was really practical and very tangible. I want to quickly see if Hannah would be interested in joining our conversation at this point to share some of the themes that came up in questions.
Sure, thank you. So some really, really useful information there. Thank you to all the speakers. I'm going to start with a question for Yasmin, which there's been a bit of discussion in the Q&A, but what does engagement actually mean? And is consumption of content alone enough to be considered engagement?
So that's a great question. Obviously, consumption of content is a really important part of measuring engagement. However, signing up for a newsletter, you know, that's not technically consumption, but that is engagement, because it's an individual saying, I want to get more content from your organization. If you have virtual events, or, you know, someday when we have live events again, you know, people attending those live and or virtual events, that is engagement. Listening to podcasts, that is engagement. So all of those ways in which our readers interact with us. I mean, one of the other ways to think about it is engagement is all about building a relationship with your readers. The reason we talk a lot about consumption is because it's easier to measure. It's easier with a very simple tool like Google Analytics. We can very easily measure how many people came to our website, how long they stayed, how many page views they turned. And so if we aren't measuring engagement today, start simple. Don't try to boil the ocean, right? Start with the simple measurements. Over time, you can become more sophisticated about how you measure engagement, but think about it as building a relationship with your readers and the ways in which you can do that.
That's great. Thank you very much. Another question came in for Styli. So you talked a lot about a multimedia strategy when you were kind of marketing your investigative story. You talked about your website, video, social media, and complex communication strategies. So on the question that came in was, on what basis did you decide that a multimedia approach was right for this story? Is it the importance of the investigation and potential impact? What are the kind of things that you considered?
Yeah, so starting with the importance of the investigation, we knew that affecting one of the main political figures in South Africa, that this was going to be a huge story, and we needed to put as much effort and resources and a different approach to it this time as well. We'd been building up and talking about how we could really extend the life of these investigations that, you know, sometimes could be a bit fleeting in a very busy news cycle. And then the other thing was also the nature of the story, given that these transactions had happened all over the country. So there was obviously a mapping type opportunity that came up. There was, quite easy to sort of make that, but to make that link. But it was, in which format do we do that? And I think it was from a Google newsletter that we had seen that Google Earth Studio was now available, and we sort of mentioned that and parked that with the multimedia team. And so it was really a combination of those things: the importance of the story, the amount of work that was going into it, and the nature of the story as well, lending itself to map data.
Thank you. Off the back of that, how many people were actually involved in marketing this one story? Like how many resources do you put into getting your story out there?
Yeah, well, we don't have the biggest team in the world. I can't remember how many people were involved there, but the head of our membership program got involved in making sure that the newsletter went out to the newsletter subscribers. I think we got hold of the newsletter editor, made sure that that they were going to be featured prominently. The production team needed to keep the story up on the homepage for the entire day, and then the journalist as well. We prepared her, and she's an old experienced person at this now. Is that those calls then just start flooding her inbox and her phone the next day, and to really maximize on the coverage from other media outlets as well. So we have different people involved, whether it's production, whether it's the people involved in the editorial process, whether it's myself or some of the people in the newsletter and the membership team. We're always communicating with each other to see, okay, what else can we do? How can we create value to our readers, to our members? The debate that we have is often do we keep this, for example, do we keep this benefit of getting the story first to our members, or do we give it to everyone in our newsletter base, which is wider? And with important stories like this, we always go with the wider audience, because it's really more about the impact of the story being read and being consumed by as many people as possible, rather than just our membership base, which is much smaller. Thank you.
That's really interesting. It's really cool to hear about a specific example. Another question came in for Rossalyn. So you talked a lot about goals and kind of getting feedback and metrics. And the question was, aside from Google Analytics, are there any tools that you would recommend for obtaining metrics and getting those kind of getting the barometer for like how the story is reaching people?
Sure. I mean, I just again, this is all on GIJN site as well. I give various links out, but it depends. If it's website engagement and thinking about Google Analytics obviously being great to quantify like the number of people to your website, but also again, as Yasmin mentioned, how long are they spending on the page, and where in the world are they coming from? So Google Analytics is obviously a big one. Thinking about Twitter and Facebook's own analytics are actually really decent. They only go back a month. But they are, if you are like, an organization that's strapped for cash, they are decent and they can give really great breakdowns of engagement with posts, how far that reach goes. And then there are various other tools. Again, if you're trying to identify the stories that are trending where you are, BuzzSumo is great at seeing what stories are going crazy on Facebook. There's various things like, let me pull up my, we actually, there are various tools that will be able to quantify your metrics when it comes to, we use Buffer actually in-house at GIJN, and there's various other simple tools like that, that some are paid for and some aren't. So again, looking at your organization and seeing what you can spend money on and what you can't. There are a lot of great free resources. And actually, I should add a note that a lot of the paid tools that I link on my article, a lot of them offer discounts for nonprofits, and depending on where you are in the world, most of them are global as well. And so do your research and figure out what platforms and what tools there are where you are in the world, but a lot of them are global, a lot of them offer discounts. It's always worth asking if they don't. But looking at the metrics of being like, great, these numbers are here, but actually, are these numbers consistent? Are people coming back? Are they also then, as subscribing to a newsletter after that? Are they, it's not just, to go back to my original point about traffic. Traffic and numbers on pages is great, but actually maintaining and building that long-term relationship with readers is key. But yeah, a bunch of links and things on the site.
Thanks.
Not able to do the little clap emoji, but strongly agreed on that, Rosalind.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that question? Yasmin, do you have any other tools or advice about metrics?
Yeah, I was just thinking that there are also, again, these cost some money, so it depends on what your budget is, but there are tools out there like Chartbeat and Parsley that are really, really useful for newsrooms. And again, you have to spend a little bit of money, and I think they might have a free version. I know at one time they did. I don't recall if they still do. But with a tool like Chartbeat, not only do you get all kinds of data and metrics real time, but you can actually do some real time headline testing as well to see, which headlines are working better. So some of these tools not only help you measure kind of real time what's going on with readership, but they also have some advanced capabilities like A/B testing of headlines.
That's great. Thank you. Do you have something to add, Ros?
Yeah, just one thing. Actually, if there are organizations in here that do have the money to develop tools in-house when it comes to A/B testing headlines or subject lines or images, BuzzFeed had that. I worked at Upworthy before. Like these places, the reason why, they are constantly testing headlines, thumbnails, all of these things. And so if you do have the money, then I do recommend looking into seeing if you can develop something about that. It does make a massive difference in terms of pushing people. If you, again, like getting people initially on your website, on your page, and then see what you can do from there to get them to sign up, etc. So
thank you both. They're really interesting suggestions. So another question that came in was for Yasmin again. So how effective is it for a small investigative outlet to work with kind of bigger media groups? I think we talked a little bit about it before with Styli's investigation, but it obviously would increase an audience, and but in your opinion, does it deliver anything further to the small organization other than just that increased audience?
I mean, this is a personal opinion, and having worked with organizations that do that, that work in partnership, that produce journalism in partnership with other organizations, I think it can be very useful because for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can get your stories out to just a wider audience. But the trick there is, who's getting credit for that investigative story, right? I mean, if you publish it jointly, it's kind of joint credit, and you want to ensure that your organization's brand is there, so that it doesn't just appear as if the partner created that investigation. So I think it obviously it helps you get additional reach, but it can also help you with, and I almost hate to use the word credibility, but it can help you with the credibility of your brand. It enables, it gives you more oomph. It can give you more oomph, you know, assuming that the co-publisher, you know, has a lot of oomph. So I think you have to think about what's best for your organization. But if you have the opportunity to co-publish with, you know, trustworthy quality brands, that it's a smart thing to do. Just make sure that you are given credit, like right up front, the bylines, you know, that your brand is there, that it doesn't appear as if it's only the co-publisher that's getting all the credit for that investigation.
That's great. This is the final question, but I'd just like to remind everyone that there is another session tomorrow, which we'll share the link at the end to sign up for. So if you have more specific questions about your own investigations or organizations, please do sign up. But the final question is for Ros, which there's been a little bit of talk in the chat about kind of using all the different platforms that are out there and how that might not be the best strategy. So could you kind of talk a little bit more about the drawbacks of using all available platforms rather than being specific?
Sure. So I'll just give you, there's nothing worse than seeing a Twitter feed that's just used as like an RSS feed for a news organization. It's really boring. It's not, there's so many opportunities of the ways that you can share your content and use and information in different creative ways on these platforms. And if you're not using it for the purpose that they're built for, you know, Twitter's for engagement. Twitter's, you know, you can join in conversations on there. And so actually, if you don't, you know, I would just think a little bit differently about, like, you don't need to spread yourself thin. And I just see that time and time again, media organizations really, oh, you know, let's get a Facebook, this page. It's like, you don't need to necessarily do that. Actually, if you have a smaller team, invest in and focus in actually in just a really strong newsletter where your name and your brand recognition is consistent. Or it depends where you are in the world, right? You know, Telegram, I'm obsessed with right now, because just seeing the audiences that exist on there in some parts of the world is just amazing. And actually, you know, maybe it makes sense if your media organization in a part of the world where Telegram is huge, you just have a Telegram channel, you know, that maybe that's enough, and your website. And so I've just, you don't need to be everywhere and spread yourself thin. If you don't have the time, money, resources, you know, the New York Times and places, of course, they can exist everywhere because they have the money and the resources. But if you're a smaller independent organization or smaller group, you don't need to follow the crowd just because everyone else is. And I see that happen every time there's a shiny new toy, people go and chase after it, put themselves on that platform. And it's just, if I'm totally blunt, it's just a waste of everyone's time. So happy to go more into detail about that in tomorrow's session, but that's my thought.
Thank you very much. And there is one quick thing that I just wanted to address, a question from Patricia in the chat, and we can talk more about this tomorrow, but she had asked, can you give us some tips on how to think about engagement while working on the story? So when you're actually in the act of reporting and fact-finding, so as to shape the investigation to something that will appeal. I think there is a really simple rule of thumb here, which is, what is it that your audience will want to know? So in the audience research world, we think about this as, for any of our internal partners, what is the end of the sentence, I wish I knew, with an ellipsis. And I think this is a great way to approach it, just to keep in mind, like, what is the thing that your reader wishes they knew? There is a investigative organization, Reveal, from the Center for Investigative Reporting in Northern California, that did a fantastic series early in the Trump administration about illegal immigration. And they got a question at one point from a reader, okay, you've talked all about immigration, but you never actually addressed, in the eyes of the US government, what is the path to legal immigration? And it was sort of this, oh my gosh, we got so into the story that we never talked about that from the very beginning. And with that, sadly, we're out of time for today. I do really want to thank GIJN, MDIF, and all of those of you who joined us live or are watching this later. And a very big thank you to our speakers, Yasmin, Styli, and Rossalyn. Please remember to check out GIJN.org and MDIF.org for more tips, tools, and resources. We would love to see you tomorrow for our open forum related to this session, in which you'll be able to sort of talk with us live and ask questions about your organization's own strategies. I know, for example, there was a great question from Yemen about not just protecting staff, but also really sort of being considerate about some of the very real constraints in the region. So I want to make sure that we pin that one. This open forum will take place tomorrow, the 19th of March at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It does require a separate registration, and the link to do so is in the chat, and you can register at GIJN's website. Thank you to translators. I know this was a lot of work. I will try to slow myself down tomorrow. Thank you all. Be well and goodbye.